This is Political Animals.
Hello everyone and welcome to Political Animals. My name is Adam. This is the weekly news and opinion segment of the Commoners podcast, and again John and I will be writing and recording separately. This has been a rather eventful week in the US, and shortly I'll be handing over to John to allow him to vent some of his frustration. But first, some good news from Europe. Following on from last week's events in the House of Lords, in which the unelected members passed an amendment to the Article 50 bill, the Lords have yet again been able to add a new requirement to the law which gives authority to the UK government to start the Brexit process. When Article 50 is triggered by the UK government, it will kickstart a 2-year period in which the UK will have to negotiate the terms of its withdrawal from the EU. This includes what trade will look like between the UK and the EU, the status of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in Europe, what the border between the Republic of Ireland and the North will look like, and of course the final bill on services not yet paid for. The initial legislation passed by the House of Commons gave the government an absolute power over the terms of the final deal. The amendment passed by the House of Lords this week, however, mandates that Parliament have a final say on the deal, effectively giving the House of Commons a veto. It allows Parliament at the end of negotiations to say to the Prime Minister, "This isn't good enough. Do it again." But before we get too excited, there are some real life drawbacks to this amendment. First, unless an extension is agreed upon by all members, the UK and the other 27 EU nations, the UK will only have 2 years to negotiate. Only 2 years to negotiate. So that if the Prime Minister comes back to the Commons with a final deal in the final days of the 2-year period and is vetoed by the Commons, the UK will exit the EU, regardless. And it will revert to World Trade Organization rules, which is bad for a nation that relies fairly heavily on imports of goods. Second, the EU negotiating team can use the knowledge that the UK government has to get final approval from Parliament to their advantage, crafting weaker deals to put pressure on the UK government. But for the unelected, classist, inexcusable, all-round democratically reprehensible Chamber of Parliament to tell the elected chamber that it is shirking its democratic duty is frankly an embarrassment. Remember, the House of Commons forwent their own amendment giving themselves a veto power, instead handing all power over to the government, and this being the assembly that is supposed to be holding the government to account. Like the amendment designed to guarantee EU citizens permanent residency, this veto amendment too will have to be sent back to the House of Commons for approval, and it likely faces an embarrassingly steep climb to get it to pass. Next, we return to Europe and to one of my favourite countries, Iceland. This week we observed and celebrated International Women's Day, and on that day the government of Iceland introduced legislation mandating pay equality for employees in companies with 25 or more staff. Iceland has been ranked the highest for gender equality for the last number of years, but it still hadn't been able to overcome this final hurdle, with men earning approximately 15 to 18% more than women. Starting in 2022, companies will have to prove that men and women are being paid equally for the same job and the same work. Now, Switzerland and the US state of Minnesota already have this type of scheme, but they're voluntary. Iceland will be the first country to make it mandatory. The legislation is still subject to the approval of the Icelandic Parliament, with some opponents claiming that it adds extra burdens on companies. But we put burdens on companies all the time when it comes to auditing annual accounts and turning in tax reports. And I think it's a good thing to see equal pay in the workplace raised to the tedious and dull standards of taxes and auditing. In a sense, it normalises equal pay and makes it an unexceptional expectation, the way it should be. The legislation is expected to pass. Equal rights are human rights. And finally, we jump home to Scotland for a bit of a tease. We all know that polls can be untrustworthy at times and ultimately just snapshots of random subsets of a population. But today, a survey conducted by Ipsos Mori showed support for independence and support for the UK, the Union, at 50% each. When don't know responses are included, support for independence actually sits at 47% and support for the Union sits at 46%. This is the first time since July, right after the Brexit vote, that independence leads the Union in polling data. Now, the important thing in polling data, of course, is trend over time. And after a dip in October and November of last year, support for independence has been shifting steadily upward. With the British economy holding strong after Brexit initially, confidence in the Union was also at its highest. But as the direction of Article 15 negotiations come out, and the true cost of Brexit takes its toll, it may become more apparent that Scotland's economic and social security may be better off in its own hands. So watch this space. So there you have it, John. 3 uplifting stories for you from Europe. I've had a good week, and I'm feeling pretty good. I'm sure you've had a similar week, right?
I don't know about that. Wow. Where do I start? I don't even know. This week has been eventful, to say the least. We could talk about Donald Trump accusing Barack Obama of literally wiretapping Trump Tower during the presidential campaign. Of course, there's no evidence to support his claim there, but he was tweeting about it like a madman on Saturday morning. We could talk about how the new Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Ben Carson, referred to people brought to the United States as slaves as immigrants. That's nice, Ben. Isn't it? Isn't that sort of like saying being kidnapped by ISIS is nothing more than a free vacation to Syria? We could talk about Scott Pruitt, the new head of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who literally does not believe in established facts about climate change, like how carbon dioxide contributes to global warming. That seems legitimate, the head of the Environmental Protection Agency not believing in what he's supposed to be protecting the environment from. We could talk about Trump's immigration ban 2.0, which is really not all that different. It's just tweaked a little bit to see if he could get it through the courts. We could talk about Representative Jason Chaffetz, who literally said that poor people should have to choose between buying an iPhone and paying for their health insurance, investing in their own health care. I'm sorry, but how do those two costs compare? Buying a $500 iPhone versus paying $25,000 in any given year based on, your premiums and your co-pays and anything like that. Because somehow people are out there buying 40 iPhones per year. The costs are not the same. It's really ridiculous, this idea. I'm sorry, Adam. I know that I'm supposed to come out here and give you straight news and then my opinion for the second half. But I don't know if I can do that this week. It's been a very taxing week for me. I mean, I could talk also about the CIA and the revelations from the WikiLeaks Vault 7 dump. And that now we know that the CIA basically can do whatever the hell they want. The CIA can tap into whatever they want. They could take over a car and drive it into a bridge abutment and kill you for all for all they care, with little to no oversight, and there's no problems. We could talk about how it's great when Barack Obama does that, and we're fine with that, and liberals are fine with that, because we don't look down the road and think about maybe there's going to be a president like Trump someday who won't be responsible enough to handle that sort of power. For God's sakes, the CIA can now watch you through your smart TV. We can talk about it, but it's not surprising. That's what's so disheartening about it to me, is that it's not surprising. All of those things that I just talked about are very valid news stories that deserve their own episode, but what I wanted to talk about today was the Republican alternative to the Affordable Care Act that was released this week. If I don't focus on one story, honestly, this Political Animals would go for an hour and a half. So I'm going to focus on this because I think this has the most impact on American citizens. It's literally using Americans' health care as a political football. So first of all, let's talk about the good things, the very few good things in this alternative, if you can call it an alternative to the Affordable Care Act. The act is called the American Health Care Act, proposed by Paul Ryan, of all people. And many people are calling it Obamacare Light, essentially, because it keeps several things. Insurers would still be banned from denying coverage for pre-existing conditions, which is an overwhelmingly popular feature of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. Dependents would still be able to stay on parents' insurance until age 26, another incredibly popular feature of the Affordable Care Act. Caps on annual or lifetime coverage would still be banned, another popular feature. Insurers would still have to cover certain categories of specified benefits, first covered by the ACA, such as mental health. And insurers are still prohibited from discriminating on the basis of race, sex, age, disability, what have you. And that's basically it. That's the good. The list of bad is much, much longer. So let's get to that. Removed in this new bill is the individual mandate, which requires each citizen to buy their own private health insurance. Replacing this is a 30% surcharge on insurance premiums that you would have to pay if you got insurance again after you let it lapse. So, on any given year, if I decided not to get health insurance, if it's over a certain period of time, 63 days, if it's over 63 days that I don't have coverage, when I go to buy a new insurance policy, I'm going to have a 30% surcharge that I'm paying to a for-profit insurance company. So it's not a tax anymore like it was with Obamacare if I don't have coverage. It's literally going to be profitable for insurance companies, private insurance companies, whether I buy insurance through them or if I don't. Because once I finally do need insurance, I'm going to have to pay 30% more just because I didn't have it before. So there's that. Essentially, it is a coercive sort of thing. It's not a legal mandate for you to buy insurance, but it's a penalty for not buying insurance. Gone will be the employer mandate for larger companies to offer affordable coverage. The plan is doing away with federal health insurance subsidies, which help a lot of people in the Affordable Care Act marketplace plans. They're going to remove the tax credits in Obamacare that benefit lower income people buying coverage through the marketplaces, which would end in 2020. And they're replacing that with tax credits that are based on income and age. So there is some means testing there, but mostly it's going to be based on age for you to buy your own health insurance. So they're going to offload the cost onto you and say, we're going to give you a tax credit to buy your own insurance. Somebody of my age, the tax credit will be $2,000, and like I said, it's based on age. So if you're over 60, I think the tax credit is $4,000. Under the Affordable Care Act, insurance companies were only allowed to charge older people 3 times more than what they could charge younger people. So it was costlier to insure people of an older age. So they basically allowed insurance companies to account for that cost by only charging 3 times more. That's gone. Now in this new plan, they're going to be able to charge up to 5 times more for elderly people or older individuals trying to get health insurance than somebody of my age. The Obamacare limitations on health savings accounts are going to be removed. Starting in 2018, individuals can contribute $6,550 and families will be able to contribute just over $13,000 to a pre-tax health savings account. Again, you're giving a tax credit and then you're also allowing people to put into tax-free health savings accounts, but really it's offloading the cost onto people and not federal subsidies. Really, what this is going to do is benefit people who already could afford to do this. I have access to a health savings account right now because, well, I used to because I was in a high deductible plan. I could never afford to max out what I was going to put into the HSA. I couldn't even have gotten to the max before, which was just over $6,000. But now, magically, now that you raise the limits and give me some tax credits, I'll be able to put enough money in there to afford my health insurance and to afford my out-of-pocket costs if I ever get sick. God forbid something actually terrible happens. God forbid I get cancer, and then the costs go through the roof. And then my piddly little savings account that will dry up so quickly, it won't be able to help me really at all. The cost-sharing subsidies, which were provided to insurers to help Affordable Care Act customers cover deductibles and co-payments, will be gone. That will be replaced by $100 billion over 10 years through a patient and state stability fund, which it's called, for safety net needs and for possible high-risk pools. So they're going back to high-risk pools. Essentially, people who have pre-existing conditions are going to be paying out the nose for their health insurance covers because there's not going to be any cost-sharing or subsidies for them. The Medicaid expansion, which essentially expanded Medicaid to people making, or households making 138%, I think it was, of the poverty line, that's gone. Individual states will be able to stay in it and opt into it, but the requirement is no longer going to be there. And of course, Planned Parenthood will no longer be eligible for any Medicaid reimbursements. Now, it's already the case that with the Hyde Amendment, Planned Parenthood cannot be compensated for abortions with federal funds. That's just already part of the law. But it doesn't matter. Nuance doesn't matter in these cases. They're just going to remove the funding altogether, even of the services that help prevent abortions, even of the services that help give contraceptives and actually good advice and very much needed healthcare to women. So that's gone. Another excellent provision in this law is that health insurance companies are going to be given tax incentives and tax breaks if their CEO makes over $500,000. These poor health insurance companies paying their CEOs so much money that they just need a tax break. There's no tax break in there for them to offer lower premiums. I can't tell if this bill is a healthcare bill or if it's a tax reform bill, because that's really what it seems to be. You're removing the individual mandate. Good luck keeping premiums down. Good luck keeping premiums down when you're going to require insurance companies to cover people with pre-existing conditions, but then you're not going to require people to buy coverage. Good luck. Good luck is all I have to say. Do you really think that a 30% increase on my premiums is going to somehow dissuade me from not buying insurance if I don't need it or if I feel I don't need it? It's not going to. Because then I know if I get sick, I'm already going to have to buy it, and I'm going to be able to buy it, and it's already going to be at an inflated cost, so why not pay the extra 30% and save the money up front? This could definitely lead to people fleeing the health insurance market, because if I'm young and healthy, why would I want to be in it? Why would I want to be in it? So you're keeping one of the potentially most expensive provisions of Obamacare, which is the pre-existing conditions. The only way that you could get insurance companies, private insurance companies, to cover pre-existing conditions is if you had something like an individual mandate, because then it's called economies of scale. Individually, it would be incredibly expensive to insure somebody with a pre-existing condition. But if you offset that with 100 people who are young and who are not going to incur all these expenses, then the overall cost and the average cost comes down. But you're not going to have that in this system, or potentially you could not have this in this system. The entire attitude behind this bill that somehow people should be responsible for their own healthcare, that they should be responsible for the funding of something that's so important and vital to their very existence. We pay taxes for roads. We pay taxes for the military. We pay taxes for fire departments and the police. These things that are vital to the survival of us as a people. But this attitude is not applied at all to healthcare. How? How does it make any sense? How does a system like this make any sense? The top 0.1% of Americans with this bill, and they're going to be repealing, by the way, all of the taxes that went along with Obamacare to help fund it and fund the subsidies. So the top 0.1% of Americans here, on average, are going to receive a $200,000 tax cut per year per person. Meanwhile, millions of people are going to lose insurance under this bill. Millions. Obamacare was not perfect. Don't hear what I'm not saying. I don't think Obamacare was good at all. And you know why I don't think Obamacare is good at all? Is because essentially all it was tweaking the health insurance regulations in the United States. This was not a liberal bill. This was not a progressive bill. The liberal position in this case is single payer. We didn't even get anything close to that. Obama didn't even try to get anything close to that. They started a little bit with a public option, but as soon as they got a tiny bit of pushback, they dropped it. They dropped it completely. The liberal position is single payer. This sort of individual mandate system with subsidies, you can trace this back to Richard Nixon. This is fundamentally a conservative alternative to single payer. It wasn't progressive. It insured a lot more people, yeah, but at what cost? It was much more costly than if we had explored a public option. If you want to keep the system that we have in the United States, if you want to keep the private insurance system in place, you can't get much better than Obamacare. And then also try to cover as many people as possible. You can't do it. Either you go back to the system that we had before, where it's the Wild West, health insurance companies can do whatever they want, they don't have to insure people with pre-existing conditions, they can drop you from coverage for pretty much any reason. You could have that system, or you could have a system like Obamacare and keep your private insurance companies. Essentially, it was the best way to keep the system that we have in place and not change it too much, but insure a few more people. Try to get to 100% coverage. So no, I don't like Obamacare. Don't get me wrong. But is it better than this? Absolutely, it's better than this. Absolutely. What this comes down to is it favors the rich and disfavors the poor. Millions of people who voted for Trump, I'm sure, at least thousands of people who voted for Trump are going to lose their health insurance because of this. At least Obama tried a little bit, right? For all the things that I have against him, and for all the disagreements I have with his policies, he tried. He tried to work within the system to get something that was at least a little bit good for the American people. But this? You're taking people who honestly cannot afford this already, and then you're expecting them to somehow magically have the money to once you give them tax credits. The only people it's going to help are people who are well off enough that they have the money to put aside, that they have the money to fully take advantage of these tax vehicles. And that's not the majority of Americans. It's just not. So yeah, it's a disaster, in my opinion. This bill is an absolute disaster. The only thing that could possibly save us from this, which is interesting enough, are hardcore Republicans who oppose this bill merely because it's too similar to Obamacare, keeping things like a requirement or penalty for not having insurance, and pre-existing conditions being covered, and allowing kids on your insurance till you're 26. The only thing that could possibly save us from this disaster of a bill are hardcore Republicans not playing ball with Trump and Paul Ryan. So, for once, I am rooting for Republican obstructionism. Oh God, that's pretty much all I gotta say about that. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you enjoyed today's episode, follow us on Twitter at CommonersPod for daily updates on upcoming episodes and the news. The music for today's episode was Drive by Otis McDonald. Please see the description for a link to the rest of his work.